Loosen up. That's all. Let's get out the wiggles here. Week 9. Hey, everybody. It's a football Sunday, and it's great to be joined by everybody here. Dr. Jene Bramel, Mr. Jason Wood, and hopefully here soon, DFS and Donuts, Mitch Carl, to go over some DFS angles. Let's go ahead and jump right in here, Doc. Keenan Allen, it's been kind of a changing situation over the last 24 hours. But right now, it looks like he will play. But also, what can we learn from how this trajectory has gone with Allen to prepare for future weeks where we're going to have these kind of touch and go situations with players that are ill?
Yeah, I think the touch and go is always going to come on the weekend. The NFL protocol now with COVID is not just COVID, but it's all illnesses to make sure that there aren't any hiccups with potential false negative tests or otherwise. So a player that reports any symptoms, they're now being tested on a daily basis routinely, but has always needed 2 tests 24 hours apart to be negative and then some improvement in symptoms. So with travel on the weekends, with some frankly inconsistent test reporting times. We saw with Green Bay last week that some game day tests weren't coming back until the game has started or even afterwards. It's not always going to be clear whether or not players are going to be cleared in time to go if their illness is within pretty close to 24 hours. So I don't know if we were using Friday's test as the first test and Saturday's test as the second test, or if this morning's tests were processed a little bit more quickly. But I think it is very much going to be a week to week. And, some of these are going to be hour to hour situations where we just won't know exactly whether or not a player is going to be cleared until that hurdle gets known. And the teams aren't going to know either. So it doesn't seem to be an issue for Keenan Allen this morning. But as you said, it could definitely be in future weeks.
Welcome, Mitch Carl, DFS and Donuts. Mitch, I like to think of that Millie Maker lineup almost like the combination on one of those briefcases. You want to get each tumbler to the right place, and you hope to unlock a briefcase full of money. With Keenan Allen in, complicates things a little bit on the Chargers side. But if we look over today's slate, Mitch, I see Chargers, Raiders. I look at how these offenses have played, how these quarterbacks have played, and I'm thinking old school AFL shootout, which none of us are old enough to remember, but we can picture in our mind's eye. So is it important to have a few of those little tumblers on this Chargers, Raiders game? Are there any favorites you have for DFS today?
Yeah, that's funny that you phrase it like that because it is going to be shootouts galore today. I truly think so. We have 11 teams with over a 25-point implied team total. That's half the team. So literally every favored team today has over a 25.75 implied team total points based on Vegas. That just means you're going to have some very high scoring games, and the discrepancy in some of these games and the team lines, they're not that bad. They're not bad at all. So it's not like we have like a Jets and Chiefs type line from last week, or maybe that was a couple weeks ago. They all run together now. And I'm thinking it's just going to be a nice big day of offenses. Now, if that is the case, I don't think it's incredibly important to find that like one stack that no one has shares of. I think when you have these very high scoring days, these high scoring affairs, you just got to be on the right players. And I think that allows the ownership levels to kind of flatten themselves out. When you have so many great targets, it's not like everybody's all in on, Alexander Madison the one week that he was like 50% owned and looked like a plug and play, a lock. This week, we have a bunch of great looking running backs, and they're all over the map on their ownerships. And I don't think that there's going to be like these uber chalk, these mega chalk spots. I think really the only spot would be if Kelvin Ridley ends up being out. And I'd love to hear from Jene Bramel because I'm not even up to date if he's out. I don't know if he is. And Julio Jones would then become probably the closest thing to mega chalk to me. You already alluded to one of them with Keenan Allen with his the sore throat this morning. I love Justin Herbert. He's actually my number one quarterback this week and my building blocks stacks for the week 9. So I love the Chargers, and I like running it back with Darren Waller, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen this week because there's a lot of great offenses. And sorry for the late arrival, by the way. Some technical difficulties.
Fashionably late. Make a great entrance. Gene, Calvin Ridley, since Mitch brought it up, this is one where we have the status, but we also have the practice reports, and we have the extemporaneous information. Not expected to play today. Do you feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, I just don't see much chance that with a new injury, soft tissue injury like this, without being able to practice it, even though it's been 10 days in a relatively mild situation, just don't see him going.
Mega chalk, I like that. Woodrow, let's stay on that Denver-Atlanta game. Julio Jones, the mega chalk. On the Denver side, and Gene, real quick, Tim Patrick expected to play. You feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, he should be back this week.
So now we have Drew Lock, Woodrow, coming off of this triumphant second half and close to, no Cortland Sutton, but close to that assemblage of weapons that we expected. What's your level of confidence? And also, Gene, Philip Lindsay likely to play?
Yeah, the trend has been good all week. It was always concerning that this could have been an aggravation of the injury that cost him a couple of weeks earlier in the season. But back to a full practice on Friday. Vic Fangio has been pretty optimistic about essentially all of their questionable players through the weekend. So I don't know that we're going to see another 15-plus touch week necessarily, and some of it's going to be game script dependent, but should be active and will be able to play.
So we don't have clarity here, Woodrow, right? Because we've got 2 running backs, we've got 2 tight ends, we've got 3, maybe 4 if you count Deshaun Hamilton at wide receiver. But you also have the Atlanta matchup, which was terrific on paper until Carolina ran into it last week. What's your level of confidence in the Denver offense today, Woodrow? Are you dabbling in them when you're setting your lineups?
Yeah, very low confidence. As you said, that the thing that they have going forward is the matchup, right? Clearly on paper against Atlanta, putting aside the Panthers game, but year to date should be a top 5 matchup defensively. So you like that for sure. Drew Lock's playing a little bit better. We know from Cecil that part of it is that they're handling him differently. They're basically giving him Jared Goff style. This is the play. This is who you throw it to, and whatever works, right? I mean, hey, it's about winning games and about fantasy productivity. But I think it's tough to get a lot of confidence, right? Because number one, I'm not entirely sold on Drew Lock, so I don't know that Drew Lock is a good enough quarterback where I just assume because he has a good matchup, he's going to put up big numbers. And then 2, as you said, I mean, pretty much the full complement is back. And I think we could all agree that Jerry Jeudy is, if there is someone that's going to help carry you to fantasy playoff success because they break out towards the end of the season, it's going to be Jeudy based on talent profile and upside. But he hasn't really done it yet, right? I mean, he's been okay. He hasn't been a major asset yet, though. So I don't have a lot of confidence. That being said, I think it's totally reasonable to be in the position of playing Jeudy this week, particularly in a flex or a three WR3 spot. Lock, I have trouble understanding why Lock would be your best option this week, unless for some reason you ended up drafting Goff and Wentz and you just had to scramble for somebody. So not in on Lock, but think it's okay if you're forced into it, but okay with Jeudy and everybody else is sort of a pass for me.
Yeah, what a picture I have in my mind, Woodrow, when you mentioned Lock in the offense, and what Cecil's been narrating this for us. I think of like the mama bird chewing up the food for the baby bird, right. But Jerry Jeudy makes the most sense in that approach, and we'll see if Lock comes back to earth. But let's look for some rocket ships, Mitch. Like you said, shootouts. Let's touch on a couple of these other shootouts for DFS purposes. Houston, Jacksonville, usually a fun, wild, woolly kind of game. This year, neither of these teams are going anywhere. You've got Jake Luton's first start. Bradley Roby is out. Jacksonville has looked like a team that's getting rigor mortis in that weekend at Bernie's franchise way. So what are our angles here on Houston, Jacksonville? How important is it to get a piece of this game in your DFS lineup?
Yeah, it's unfortunate with Luton there, and you just don't know what you're going to get out of those 3 wide receivers in Jacksonville who have often been fine GPP options, as one of them always seems to go off. And I don't know what's going to happen this week. I think the unknown actually kind of piques my interest a little bit, truly. And I like the spot, but I'm only targeting the Houston side of the big stacks, the larger side of the stack. So I'm looking at like a Watson, Fuller, Brandon Cooks, running it back with maybe LaVisca, something like that. It's my ownership will be very low. One of them that we kind of glossed over there was actually True Lock. He is just 5.2K over there on DraftKings, and he is actually one of my favorite pay down options, probably my very favorite pay down option today. If I'm not paying down for him, I'm going all the way up the salary scale to Herbert, Josh Allen, Russell Wilson, the rest of them, and because of just the stacking ability. And I think just like we're going in the route right now of talking about these large over unders, these very close shootout type games, I think that one potentially goes under owned because of this exact thing. I think everyone sees these big numbers, these inflated totals, and they run to it. They run to Herbert. They run to, Herbert against Vegas, because that's a 54.5 point total with a 1.5 point Vegas line. And there's other games on the slate that are very similar. Seattle and Buffalo right now have a 54 point total with a 2.5 point spread. I mean, that is juicy for DFS. But the thing is, if the rest of the field is on these games and the ownership is elevated on these spots, and you have other positions, other players that are very similar floor and ceiling combinations at some of these positions. I want those over these mega chalk spots. I mean, I'm looking at ownerships around the industry right now on Tyler Lockett and Stephon Diggs, 25, 30%. And there's other wide receivers that are in very similar spots that are in good matchups that I want to target instead because of that crazy ownership. And I'm going to find every way I potentially can to get off some of this chalk. And even if it means just going down from the top owned stacks to like the third or fourth owned stacks, like, give me those guys because they're all in very similar upside situations today.
So who are a couple of those receivers you're talking about, like Tyreek Hill, Terry McLaurin? Who are some of those alternatives?
Yeah, you nailed it. I like McLaurin today. I like Sterling Shepard on the opposite side of him. You can stack those two together as a double stack. Believe it or not, I like Allen Robinson today. I get that he's not getting a lot of targets right now, but you can pair him with A.J. Brown and Ryan Tannehill. I mean, there's a nice 3-player stack right there. There's options. They're abundant today, and I just don't want to sit on that chalk. We see the chalk in NFL just bust all the time. Tyreek Hill is going to be potentially a single-digit owned player today on the highest scoring offense in the NFL, with the highest total today at 31.5 points. And you have a plethora of options to running back on the other side. You can go Mahomes, Hill, Kelsey, and hope that team does score over 4 touchdowns, and running back with Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore, or Robbie Anderson alone, or DJ Moore alone, Curtis Samuel, whatever you want to do, you can run it back on the other side. Don't underestimate the impact that Christian McCaffrey has on this offense. Listen, I get it. Mike Davis helped the offense stay afloat. He did a phenomenal job coming in and just taking the role and doing what he could with it. But Christian McCaffrey is a game changer. And I think this offense is going to be potentially a little under-owned today while people don't know what to do with Christian McCaffrey. But listen, if CMC does not get the volume that we're used to, I think the offense potentially just going to be better with him on the field. And if that comes to fruition, there's a spot here today where you're able to stack up the best offense in the NFL and the Chiefs and run it back with any one of the Panthers offensive weapons and have yourself a phenomenal, very low owned stack.
Yeah, Mitch is fired up today. I said Mitch is fired up today. It's nice.
Yeah, well, it's a great week for unlike last week, which was kind of a fantasy wasteland. This week, there's a lot of options to make the puzzles interesting. And on the McCaffrey Davis thing, really quick, YKMGD, it's the Ian Rappaport report. The Christian McCaffrey and Mike Davis will rotate series. Dr. Gene, does that make sense based on what we know about the injury?
I think it just has to do with, I don't know. I've been hearing most of the week that Mike Davis may not be all that prominent of a play today, but so it just kind of stands to reason that I don't think there's an injury issue here necessarily. McCaffrey's looked good. He's been called fresh and fast. There's been 2 weeks of reconditioning. But Mike Davis has showed himself well. This has never really been a team that's been a split backfield. So I don't know that we're going to see split touches necessarily. I think you'll see more Mike Davis than you would have in a pre-injury scenario for Christian McCaffrey. But I don't know that I'm buying split touches. It certainly, those reports wouldn't make me shy away from McCaffrey.
Yeah, definitely have McCaffrey in there. It'll be interesting to see. Where we really want is Teddy Bridgewater to play well to keep this close. Real quick, Woodrow. Golden Tate going to come back to the Eagles?
Stop it. Stop.
Sorry.
It's nonsense. Come on, stop.
He's going to be out there for somebody momentarily.
How about Dez Bryant and Antonio Brown both being active this week?
Yeah, everything. And Alex Collins, too. You know, give it time. It's only week 9. Who knows? You think of it like a TV show, you know, and who's going to come out, next big surprise, the next big twist. So another twist to this week, Gene, Ezekiel Elliott. 24 hours ago, we'd say he's not playing. Maybe this morning we say, well, he should play or will play. But all these things are just making it more difficult to understand what's going to happen with the Cowboys backfield instead of less.
Yeah, Brown and Bryant, we're turning back the clock to 2016 in lots of different ways this week. So,
yeah.
Elliott, I'm not too concerned about him other than the fact that everything else around him isn't reassuring, right? I mean, we're dealing with the 4th quarterback, dealing with a terrible offensive line, Pittsburgh defense, arguably one of the best run defenses in the league. You just don't like what you see there. And it makes you a little bit nervous that after some midweek reassurance that, we're seeing some signs on Friday, Saturday where the local beat writers were concerning, but apparently Saturday's workout went a little bit better. Probably going to see a little bit more Tony Pollard this week. I just don't know how you would trust Elliott to have any sort of statistical production in the scenario that he's facing, and the injury doesn't help.
Yeah, this one feels like a sacrificial lamb. Garrett Gilbert, Steelers can be overconfident going into games like this, but we'll see. Speaking of Des Bryant, let's go. And I'm not sure if we got Mitch or not, so I'll go to you, Woodrow, on this one. Baltimore's backfield, because J.K. Dobbins has inserted himself. Last week, the Steelers were about as tough a matchup on paper against the run as you could come up with, and Dobbins was magnificent. This week, because people are weighing Dobbins against all kinds of names, and also, of course, this has got DFS implications too. Guys like Antonio Gibson. It's not easy to know whether to play J.K. Dobbins today. Woodrow, what would your advice be to folks that are agonizing about him?
Yeah, look, first of all, we have to start with the matchup, right? We've been spending a lot of this opening hour talking about a potential bonanza week with lots of shootouts, but Colts Ravens probably ain't it, Chief, right? Those two defenses, at least in terms of rushing defenses, are two of the 5 best in the league. So don't love the matchup for sure. So you have a most of the season we've had a conundrum of committee in a tough matchup. That isn't necessarily like a feel good spot for Dobbins. Now that said, if we rewind the tape and people remember the show last week, you kind of asked me about what I'd like to see. And I said, the best case scenario for Dobbins is that he gets his shot that week, right? To actually play enough that we see that he can be the elite back we think he can be. And, while I'm not sure if that was an A+ call because Gus Edwards balled out too, I think we saw that Dobbins is who we thought he was, right? If he's behind that offensive line in that scheme with Lamar Jackson, obviously making the running game much easier because they have to account for him, Dobbins can be an every week fantasy star. Now, will he this week? I'm not counting on it. I have him in a lot of lineups as a flex. Again, this is a weird year where you probably don't have as much flexibility with plug and play as you normally would with the bye week situations of pace. I think Dobbins is a very reasonable person to be in most people's lineups if you have him. It would be hard for me to imagine a scenario where most 12-team leagues and higher have Dobbins on the roster have 3 other viable running back flex options ahead of him this week. So I'd still go with him, but I'd temper expectations. I wouldn't expect this to be building on top of what we saw last week. I think it may be a statistical step back, but as long as he plays well, gets a good snap count, we should still feel really good about him helping you in your stretch run.
I say this: if you're on the fence about Dobbins, just play him. He's got big play upside, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Ravens circle the wagons a little bit and stay with the run even more in this game and not put Lamar Jackson in situations where his confidence might be further cracked. But we want to create confidence, Mitch. I want to go back to something you said about Drew Lock, that going down to Drew Lock at quarterback, and this back whenever I was in a state where DFS was legal, this was always the thought process on Sunday mornings. Whether to go down to a low-priced option, take more risk, so you can get in another chalk play or another, I don't want to set my lineups today without this player. So give me a name or two that if you do go down to Drew Lock, or otherwise you decide to put in a DJ Dallas or put in somebody that's going to free up more cash to get exactly who you want. Who are the exactly who you want players?
Oh, I love that. And great memory. You must have been a pretty fine DFS player yourself back in the day there, Sig. So I loved me some Drew Lock this morning because of the salary relief. And the entire stack there just opens up so much money because his targets that you would stack with him are cheap. And Sig just nailed it for anybody who's just kind of testing the waters of DFS or want to try a new strategy. The guys I'm looking to pay up for today are players like DeAndre Hopkins against Miami today. I think no one's going to be on him. Ownerships right now are around 10, 11%. We have him at a 10.77% DraftKings ownership projection, 11.43. And it's because of awkward pricing. I love awkward pricing in DFS. Believe it or not, the more awkward, the more that it allures me. Anytime that you have those players that are not awkwardly priced, the entire industry sees that and they're like, oh, I want some of that. That's real easy for me to go pay for. So Tyler Lockett at 6.8K on DraftKings, everyone loves him because it's an easy plug into their lineups. But if it's easy, everyone sees it. So you got to go with those guys that are awkward, like DeAndre Hopkins, where you're paying up a little bit more, kind of at a price point where you're a little uncomfortable to do so. And those are the guys I want some of today. So it's DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver. At tight end, I'm going up for Travis Kelce. This guy has 25 plus on 4 games this year. I mean, slate winning appeal. No other tight end is even remotely close to him today. So there's plays like that where those are the types of guys I'm on. At running back today, it's Derrick Henry. Everyone else wants everybody around there at those price points. Delvin Cook, maybe even CMC is somebody I'm paying for. Listen, we saw Mike Davis come in there and run 79% or more of the snaps since week 3. And Gene nailed it. This offense has never been a spot where there's been multiple running backs sharing the football. And I think CMC probably slides in at 70% or more of the snaps today. And that probably equates to 20 plus touches. 20, 22, I would say probably is going to be maybe around a good projection. In which case, give me 20 touches of CMC today where he's going to rack up, PPR potential as well. Derrick Henry, though, I think is, he's due for another 2-3 touchdown game. He had multiple touchdowns for 3 out of the last 4. And is this the week where he goes in there, hammers in 2 5-yard touchdown runs and just blows out every single running back in the same price point? I think it could potentially be, and you're going to get him at single digit ownership. Anytime you can get a guy like Derrick Henry with his touchdown equity at 8 to 10% ownership, I mean, I'm all over it.
Yeah, Henry versus Cook is going to be a big choice after Cook was the golden ticket last week. Last parting shot real quick. How is the best way to take advantage of the mismatch in Arlington as the Steelers go down to face the Cowboys in what used to be a great rivalry?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. This is going to be, I think it's going to be an absolute bloodbath. I'm sorry. And that kind of actually takes me off a lot of the Steelers, truly. I don't know if Big Ben's going to need to throw the ball too much. We haven't seen him throw the ball very much over the last 2 weeks. And unfortunately for you James Conner lovers, which I am one of them for sure, I think he's a phenomenal football player. I think he's very underrated, and he's having a fantastic season. He's priced up on FanDuel, 8.2K. Don't like that whatsoever. I'm going up to Derrick Henry, or I'm going down to other players. I mean, if I can get J.K. Dobbins, who had 66% of the snaps last week, to Gus Edwards, 32%. I think Dobbins, I believe, over there on 4.9K or 5.3K, whatever it is on FanDuel. Phenomenal price tag. And just as you said, Sig, I think there's issues right there right now with a little bit of confidence wavering out of Lamar Jackson. He just looks a little tentative or apprehensive in the pocket to unleash that football. And I think they're going to lean on J.K. Dobbins, which gives me a lot of money to go up and get some of these other players. So I'm not entirely sure what to do with Pittsburgh. It makes me want to get off them a little bit. I think that you're going to see potentially like a 21-0 type game, 24-0 going into the third quarter. And does James Conner need to touch the football 25 times? I don't think so. I mean, he's averaging 20 touches per game, and these are with close football games. And I think it's going to be one of those games, 14 carries, 2-3 catches, and then Benny Snell time. No thanks.
Yeah, it's always Mitch Carl, DFS and Donuts time. Rise or fall. Folks know it, love it. And again, for all your DFS needs, not just football. Thanks for always making time for us on Sunday mornings.
Best of luck. Thank you very much for the invite. Take care, everybody.
Yeah, always. Real quick, Gene, before we dig in deeper on some of these matchups. The Mark Ingram injury, I know they floated out there that week 9 wasn't a sure thing last week. How much we get our hopes up that they're taking it slow with him because maybe there could be a changing of the guard in the backfield, or do you think they're playing it straight up and this is just in line with the injury he has?
A little bit of both. I don't think there's any reason to rush him back when you've got other players performing as well as they are. And you know that they're going to be the future for you. So there's no reason to rush a player back that's less than full strength and hasn't been playing better than the players that they've got around him. So, but I also think this is a high ankle sprain. It's always way too optimistic to expect that a running back with anything more than the very lowest grade injury can come back. Just the way that they're tackled, the way they're taken to the ground, their feet up underneath them, high risk of issues. And then it's a difficult situation to brace and cut from. So makes every sense in the world to bring him back a little bit more carefully so that he's fully healthy. And we'll see whether or not this is more, we like what Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins bring, than Mark Ingram's issue as the rest of the season follows forward.
And on the other side of that matchup, Gene, Jonathan Taylor, full practices. Like, if they hadn't said anything, we wouldn't really even been paying attention to him on the injury front.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I didn't even include him on Monday. I had heard about it on Monday, and I thought, well, we'll just see what happens on Wednesday. Didn't really see anything. Jordan Wilkins was playing very well, and that's just something that, again, there probably was a little bit of a tweak there, but never anything that was a huge situation.
So how do we extrapolate this Jason. What do we do with this Indy backfield? Both this week is the answer, just totally stay away this week. But long term, if Jonathan Taylor is going to be okay in both a mental confidence kind of way, effectiveness way, bringing his great talent to bear in the second half of the season, because it's a great schedule after this week, right? There's somebody that should be able to take advantage of this for your fantasy team. It could be Taylor, it could be Wilkins, or this could just be frustrating. Naeem Hines, no, that won't happen, because that just makes too much sense. But how do you interpret this from a short and long-term point of view, knowing that, Phillip Rivers brings up he's nicked up, they give him sort of some plausible deniability for why he wasn't out there in the second half, when it really could just be that the team is seeing week after week that Wilkins is better. This is a puzzle. What do you see when you look at this?
One of these days, you're going to give me a softball question, Sig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Golden Tate. That was it. The Golden Tate to the Eagles
for
question.
Sure. That's true. Man, listen, I am vexed by Jonathan Taylor, because I was a believer coming in to the season for sure. That the early glimpses seem to indicate, okay, he's ready. He's going to do this. I wouldn't necessarily be turned off by the fact that another veteran back or two had success while he was struggling, but it was Wilkins, man. Like, Wilkins is not, I mean, we have a long history with who Wilkins is as a player, and he looked demonstrably better than Taylor has looked in all but one game early in the season. So, man, that is tough for me to read. Like, and then you watch the Colts, and I don't know if you think this, but when I watch them, I don't see the Jonathan Taylor I thought I'd see by this point in the season. I see a tentative, again, I don't know if it's a playbook thing, if he's having trouble grasping Nick Sirianni's system. I don't know if it's a confidence thing. Maybe it is a nagging injury thing and he's just playing tough. I don't know. But the point is, I don't like what my eyes tell me when I watch him, thinking like, but for opportunity, he's going to be a stud. Now, that said, though, as you mentioned, I mean, this week is a terrible matchup for sure. I try and be off Jonathan Taylor this week if I could. I'm not really interested in any of the Colts backfield this week, if it's avoidable. Again, of course, if you have options. But the schedule looks great in the second half, and we're far enough along the NFL season where you can really start paying attention to the strength of schedule. It's always a fool's errand to look at early weeks and say, oh, they have a good matchup, bad matchup, because a lot of times we get those wrong, hard to predict. But by this point in the season, it's pretty easy to it's pretty reliable to look at which defenses you're playing and play the matchups. So yeah, I think you don't give up on Taylor. I think you hope to see signs of life this week and next week that give you confidence to start putting him back in your lineup. I think it's entirely plausible that he's in your lineup down the stretch run, but I have to say I'm definitely disappointed so far with what my eyes have told me.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting to me is looking over the waiver wire in both dynasty and redraft leagues, underwhelmed by what people were paying for Jordan Wilkins, which I was surprised by, because he has the potential to be maybe not a league winner, but if he can stay healthy, somebody that you plug into your lineup every week. And you could have just stopped that. I'm not interested in any Colts today, again, because this offense is so spread out. We won't see T.Y. Hilton. We'll get to see, and I think Marcus Johnson is questionable. So it's going to be a really interesting game between Baltimore and Indy. It could be a springboard game for one team and one that sends the other team into a bit of a spiral. The big marquee matchup, though, Gene, tonight, New Orleans and Tampa Bay. And it's a changing cast of characters on both sides. So let's take this one side at a time. Michael Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, a lot of people with questions about Michael Thomas, at least from the medical side. What do we know?
Yeah, I think Michael Thomas ought to be fine, other than the fact that he's not taken a full speed game snap since week 1. So 2 weeks of reconditioning puts him pretty much outside that all important 7 to 10 to 14 day risk of re-injury with soft tissue injuries and hamstring strains in particular. So you'd hope that he's outside the risk of re-injury, and that despite the fact that Emmanuel Sanders has come back and Jared Cook is there and Alvin Kamara continues to be an option out of the backfield as far as catching the pass, Thomas is going to be easily the most targeted receiver. And maybe there's a little bit of rust to knock off in the first couple of series, but I don't think there's much of an injury concern. The Saints, who haven't really spoken about injuries much at all this year, uniformly from Sean Payton to Drew Brees to others, have said they're looking forward to get Thomas back and figuring out how they can work him back into the offense. And they know how to work him into the offense. There's nothing new going on here that they haven't had in the past 2 to 3 seasons. So don't have too much concern about Thomas. Emmanuel Sanders doesn't seem to have any conditioning issues or COVID-related concerns coming off of this 10-day period of isolation, so he should be good to go too.
And then Chris Godwin, Gene, he's going to play with some sort of apparatus? What's the take here on how effective he can be with that?
I didn't feel great at all about Godwin on Thursday night. I was saying he was doubtful at best. You know, he's in a cast through Thursday. They're going to allow him to try to catch the ball on Friday, see how he assimilates to a splint, and then let him go. But apparently Friday's workout went wonderfully well, didn't have any soreness on Saturday, and Bruce Arians has been pretty optimistic even since the injury, once it was decided to have it surgically stabilized so that he could return a little bit sooner, saying that he's outside the risk of infections, just a soreness issue. Godwin's a tough guy. He's going to play. And that all seems to have been borne true throughout the weekend. So the concern there, if there is a concern, is just the many mouths to feed. And now one more with Antonio Brown. Will they try to get him established in whatever package they put into place for him today? How many targets can Godwin get? But Godwin has fairly easily out-targeted Mike Evans when those two guys have been playing together. It's a good matchup for him as well. You expect this, as Mitch said, to be one of many shootouts today. So I don't have too much concern with Godwin. There's not a lot really of a aggravation situation there. And if he was catching the ball as well as he was 24 hours after having a cast removed on Thursday, then it wouldn't seem to have too much concern for him today.
This one's tough, Woodrow. And I don't know softball. Sorry, man. Antonio Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole gamut is here, right? And even whenever the team, and why should we really care what the team says? You know, he could play 10 plays, he could play 35 plays. We do have one sample size of him and Brady, first game out there, peppering him with targets. We know that was the driver of Brown joining Tampa Bay. And then, of course, this ripples through to our decisions about Godwin with the extra information that Gene added, or Mike Evans, who's starting to generate some momentum. And then on the other side of this, there's Mike Thomas facing Carlton Davis, who shut him down in week 1 before Thomas got hurt here. So what's your confidence level? Because I think that we may look back at the end of this game and say, Michael Thomas should have been on my bench. Antonio Brown should have been on my bench. Or we maybe look back at this game tonight and say, how could I have benched either of these guys? What was I doing putting Antonio Brown or Michael Thomas on my bench? Where's your heat check on these two big names?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think the easier part of this discussion is Michael Thomas, right? I mean, it was good to hear what Gene said about it because all week I've been seeing he still had the questionable tag and been a limited participant in practice. So I've been wondering, like, oh, is this just one of those things where he's still not, and it will never be 100% this year. And I guess we'll find out. But I'm going to go with the idea that they've held him out damn sure long enough that if they're going to put him back out there, they feel like they're going to put him back out there for his full role. So I just think it's almost, I cannot fathom a scenario and again, we're not talking about DFS here, but in redraft leagues where you cannot play Michael Thomas this week, regardless of matchup. I mean, if you drafted him in a COVID era season where you've had to just be absolutely super active on the waiver wire, you've held on to this asset that you spent your first round pick on and was viewed by most, myself included, I think you too, Sig, as the safest play in PPR formats. And he's finally in the lineup. Like, you have to play him, right? I cannot. I think it would be far more painful mentally to keep him on your bench to try and outsmart yourself because of the defensive matchup. Have him go off, and then you think to yourself, wow, I really could have used him this week. So he's easy for me. Like, if you have Michael Thomas, you're putting him in your roster, end of story. The other side is a much different bit of calculus, right? As you guys were talking about when you were talking about the injury side, Chris Godwin has played 4 games, but he has, as a fantasy player, been much better than Mike Evans on a per-game basis, right? It's about 17 points a game versus Evans, I think, is around 13 points a game. So when they're both out there, presuming rational coaching, rational quarterbacking, Godwin has been the better player. Now, again, if we look at the styles, it would seem to me like Antonio Brown, at least on paper, would be a more direct threat for the role that Mike Evans currently occupies. I think we will see, because it's Arians and he's smart, as is Brady. I think we'll see lots and lots of 3 receiver sets this week. I think Antonio Brown is very viable. Personally speaking, I'm putting Antonio Brown in all the lineups that I drafted him in, or not that, rather that I picked him up in as a waiver wire claim. So I'm excited. The narrative street in me thinks that, as you alluded to, Sig, like, okay, you went and got Antonio Brown. It was a controversial move. You already have 2 stud receivers. This was a Tom Brady thing. He wanted it. You gave it to him. Clearly, he's going to try and establish Antonio Brown right off the bat. Antonio Brown is certainly motivated to get off to a hot start. You have banked up other star receivers, like, this is going to work out. But, maybe it doesn't, right? It's entirely possible that the Bucs could win and win big, and it could be Evans and Godwin having huge weeks, and you wouldn't think like, oh, how did that happen? I could have never seen it coming. But I do think in this case, I'm letting myself fall down the narrative street hole and saying, yeah, Brady to Antonio Brown is what this game's going to be all about.
I think so too, actually. Then last follow-up question on this, Woodrow. After the game tonight, are we going to be putting Brady in that Mahomes? I mean, they're all, of course, Mahomes and Jackson and Murray and Wilson can all add some value as runners. So Brady can't quite match that. But otherwise, are we looking at Brady now that the full arsenal is there? Are we going to change our perception? Is this maybe a time to swap down to Brady from one of those top quarterbacks because the perceived value is about to take another jump?
I might argue that we already should have been. He's QB5 right now. He's played 8 games, so you guys like Wilson and Kyler and Deshaun and I think Aaron Rodgers and Tannehill, they've only played 7. So on a per game basis, yeah, I mean Brady isn't quite top 5, but he's right behind Wilson, Mahomes, and Murray. Right, he's certainly holding pace with the Burrows and the Wentzes and the Rodgers and the Ryans. So I say he's already on that fringe. I do think there's a teardrop there for sure, and I don't think he jumps into their tier. Like I don't think he becomes someone that you feel as good about as playing those truly elite guys. But at the end of the day, I think if you have Brady, he's going to be your starter down the second half of the season in almost all scenarios, unless you have one of those top 3 dudes.
Yeah,
and to your point about trading, I'd be fine with, and was last week as well, trading for him. I think the fear here is that if they ball out this week, and particularly if Antonio Brown looks like an All-Pro, I think his price tag probably has jumped considerably, and the person that has Brady's now thinking like you're suggesting, like, oh wow, I ended up lucking into a top 5 fantasy quarterback for the season. How awesome is that? So price is going to go up.
Lots of perception changes. And then, of course, with the Drew Brees side and the Saints offense, he has all hands on deck. He's also playing outdoors where he's usually a mere mortal. Kenny Golladay is a mere mortal with his hip injury. And I didn't get to tee this up this way on Thursday night for you, but I wanted to ask you because the injury was week to week, which is always disturbingly vague. And they said on Monday that he had to get additional tests. I was looking for results or some sort of follow-up on that. I didn't find anything, which in my mind almost seems like let's see if we stay in contention and then we can push to get him back on the field. Galladay's going to be a free agent next year too. So in so much as he has any say in this, I don't think he wants to risk, if it's this idea of, well, if you sit out for the rest of the season, you can rest it and you should be okay to do your offseason conditioning. But if you come back and push it, it's possible you could aggravate it and need surgery. Lots of layers here. What have you been able to discern? We know Galladay's out this week, but what about his return to play timeline and the nature of this injury?
Not much. I think that, the additional testing is always going to be an MRI. That tells you that it's probably less bony and more soft tissue. So could it be a hip joint issue? That would be a little bit more concerning over the long term. Is it something as simple as a hip flexor? Maybe not a big an issue. Could it be more of a core muscle injury? Sometimes those are called hip. Sometimes those are called abdomen. Sometimes they're called groin. Hard to know. I think the best piece of information we got is that they did not choose to put him on injured reserve by the end of the week. So that tells you that they're thinking that it's a 2 to 4 week situation. And week to week sometimes means multiple weeks in Philadelphia, for example, and sometimes it just means it is what it is. It's just that they don't expect them to be back in 1 week. And we know from many players, star players in particular, that once you missed 1 week, it's a little bit easier to see you miss future weeks because we're not trying to play gamesmanship with your opponents. The player is not feeling like I really don't want to miss any time. Once they miss 1 week, it's a little bit easier for them to say, okay, let's go ahead and get this right. So I think it's fine to consider him questionable for week 10, but he could very well play. Just good news that they don't see this as a 4 to 6 week situation, in which case they would have liked to have put him on injured reserve this week to have this week's game count into that count. So probably not going to be a long-term issue. I'm not expecting too much there, but the Lions don't give us much information about injuries. Maybe we hear a little bit more from Matt Patricia at the post-game press conference or on Monday.
So, Woodrow, are you shoehorning Marvin Jones into your lineups? This could be a DFS question too, because he did score twice last week. It is Minnesota, 7 rookies, I think, part of that effort to beat Green Bay. And still injuries, Gene, I don't even want to ask you to go over them specifically, but the Minnesota cornerbacks still plagued by injuries going into this week?
Yeah, looks like it.
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad, but Marvin Jones is really the opposite of reliable or consistent. And then also Jason, how does this change your perception of Matthew Stafford? Because you were holding Stafford, you're sitting on Stafford. Great schedule. This is going to be a runway. He's going to get started. Now he lost Kenny Golladay. What are we looking at in this Detroit pass offense?
I mean, you kind of took the words out of my mouth, which is that I've never been a huge Marvin Jones proponent, but I think you have to feel good about it this week, right? Now, didn't feel good midweek when we thought it was going to be Chase Daniel at quarterback with the on again, off again COVID situation with Stafford, but he's been cleared to play, so he'll be in the lineup. So without Kenny Golladay, man, and given the matchup, I don't know how you're not excited. Put it this way. If you have Marvin Jones on your roster and you're not feeling confident putting him in your lineup this week, then drop him this week for waivers, right? I mean, honestly, like this is the week. If you don't have him in your lineup this week, I don't know why you have him on your roster. It doesn't make much sense. So in fact, not being a Marvin Jones guy, I didn't draft him in very many leagues, but there's one or two where I have him and he's in my lineup this week. As to Matthew Stafford, man, I don't know. I think Stafford was coming into the season from my vantage just below that tier of projected QB1s. Someone that would be a matchup play. I think he still is. He's a gunslinger. I think they'll be in passing game scripts. So I don't think it's disastrous to have Stafford, but I also think he's entirely part of that conclave of quarterbacks this year where if there's somebody on waivers that's got a better matchup, you shouldn't hesitate. He's not someone you need to secure on your roster for a playoff push. I think he's someone that will make sense in some weeks and won't make sense in others.
Yeah, well, it's funny the way you outline that too, because I think in general, when we look at Detroit and fantasy outcomes, they don't make sense. It's just Detroit. I mean, it's like static on your TV. The Matt Patricia effect on this team and performances, and
don't sleep on my man TJ Hawkinson. Remember,
Hawkinson, the one safe play. Yeah,
I was going to say. I mean, beginning as you know, I really planted my flag on Hawkinson this year. 2-3 weeks into the season, it looked like a disastrous call. But fast forward, he's tight end 4 through this half the season, and one of the guys ahead of him, George Kittle, is pretty much out for the year, right? So you've got now. Admittedly, T.J. Hawkinson top 3 tight end this year is not the same as what you hoped a top 3 tight end would get you. But given the absolute existential crisis most of us have each week trying to figure out which tight end we're going to put into our lineups. You got to feel real good if you have Hawkins on your roster.
Yeah. What about DeAndre Swift? Or have we gotten over our slight infatuation with him, Jason? Or is this a week because of the matchup against Minnesota that you're more inclined to take a chance?
I mean, I view it as a neutral matchup in terms of the rushing option, right? But as we've established, Minnesota's just terrible against the pass, and Swift obviously can be effective as a pass catcher out of the backfield in open space. So I'm okay with Swift this week, but don't love him. Definitely, I view him as someone who you probably are making a go, no-go situation as your RB2 or your flex, and I'd be leaning no-go more times than 100 coin tosses. I'd be leaning no-go more than 50 of them.
Not even in the stratosphere of talking about fellow rookies like J.K. Dobbins or Antonio Gibson today. Defensive side of the ball, Gene. Jamal Adams, should we expect to see Jamal Adams that was that impact player that the Seahawks traded for, or based on the way that they brought him back, is this a week where he's eased back in?
I hope so. I think last week he probably would have been back in kind of that eased in situation had it not been for the illness. They just really wanted to see how his injury responded to a full week of practice before they trusted him out there. So, hopefully that extra week of reconditioning, wasn't necessarily a full week of practice this week, but as close as he could get. I think they're going to, they've had some players step up behind it, but Jamal Adams brings something to that defense that none of the other backups can bring. So I think they're going to give him as many snaps as possible. You're probably going to see him more on passing downs, which is what they need him mostly for anyway. He can come up in the box as well, but I think that's what you'll see him. So, and then next week you'll see him unleashed at a full snap count.
Yeah, lots of fascinating matchups today. Seattle, Buffalo, close to the top of the list, and I'm real fascinated to see if the addition of Jamal Adams gets the Seattle and Carlos Dunlap gets this Seattle defense to some respectability and keeps Josh Allen more on the underperforming side of what we've seen, because Russell Wilson has brought out the best, statistically especially, in his competition this year. On that Seattle side, Jason, Alex Collins is back. How much does that complicate things? If you had DJ Dallas, maybe you had him on your bench, you saw, I had 2 touchdowns. No Carlos Hyde, no Chris Carson. Yes, Alex Collins, who was originally a member of the Seahawks. Does that give us pause if we were looking to Dallas as our desperation running back two?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is yes, right? Like marginal pause, because it's another variable into the equation. If based on what DJ Dallas did last week, if we came into this situation with the same roster, knowing that both Carson and Hyde are out again, I think you'd feel actually not just okay, you'd feel really good about DJ Dallas as a potential plug and play savior for those of you, myself included, who have a lot of Chris Carson shares. As you noted, Alex Collins is familiar with the offense. Pete Carroll's familiar with him. In typical Pete Carroll fashion, he spoke about Alex Collins this week after signing him like he was an all-pro MVP candidate. He does that for everybody. He did that for Travis Homer in the preseason. So don't overreact to that. But I think he wasn't lying when he said, we feel totally confident putting Alex Collins out there. So, yeah, I think on the margin, whatever snap count and touch count DJ Dallas would have gotten without Alex Collins on the roster, you're going to have a smaller number this week. But with all that said, I think there are plenty of people who need to make that call. And I wouldn't feel comfortable having Alex Collins in as a what the heck flex, but I absolutely still feel confident in DJ Dallas because of the way he played last week, right? He didn't do anything last week that make you think that the signing of Alex Collins was because the Seahawks offensive coaches were like, this kid we need something better than this kid, right? He did what they needed him to do, especially at the goal line. So I think he's going to continue to get an opportunity set. I just think this is more about depth because they are so bereft of depth on the roster right now.
Yeah, there's no way for them to know if Hyde can stay healthy. He's already had 2 different injuries this year. And Carson with the midfoot sprain always has the potential to get worse. Gene's season can't get worse for the Jets, but we might not be able to say it's the Jets. We don't even have to stop and think about it because it looks like Jamison Crowder will be back. It's Jamison Crowder. He's been great when he's played, but also that's been difficult for him to get on the field and play. What's your outlook for him, at least medically, coming back from this groin injury?
I think medically we're in a much better spot this week than we were in the last couple of weeks, where he'd have a midweek practice, test it out, find out that he wasn't close to returning, and then shut it down for the week. So the fact that he did more on Friday, prepared to practice, and then did practice on Saturday tells you that he's probably going to be good to go. But as you said, from a medical standpoint, it doesn't look like there's much concern, although we've had a couple of aggravations with soft tissue injuries already this year. It's more of the overall Jets offense and inability to complete targets and sustain drives to run enough plays for him to be statistically valuable.
And then what about Damian Harris on the other side, Gene? Should we be scared of him this week?
No, he has been questionable for a couple of weeks. You never know the first week with Patriots players, but the key factor for me over each of the last couple of weeks has been that the team has cleared him to talk to the media on Wednesday and through the rest of the week. So that almost always tells you that they're preparing to use him as they normally would. And his stat lines are a little bit odd. He played 20 snaps last week and had 16 carries and what was an odd game against Buffalo, but you may see a similar game script for different reasons where the Patriots rely a lot on the running game today for different reasons, but just for game script purposes. So no concern for me with him.
So Woodrow, you got on one hand the New England offense, not an offense you want to trust, same as last year, right? Not an offense you really want to trust for fantasy football in any way. But on the other hand, it's the Jets. And even if efficiency isn't great, volume should be high, goal line opportunity should be there for Cam Newton, for Damian Harris, for maybe Jacoby Myers, who was the main man for Newton last week. Does the matchup make you want to dip your toes back in the Patriots waters, or do you say, I want them to prove it before I trust them in my lineup?
With Damian Harris, for sure, particularly after Gene's perspective that we needn't be worried about the questionable tag. There's always that random crapshoot with Belichick where the running back touches just don't make any sense, right? You're busy maybe raking leaves today. You come back in, right. You check the box score, and Rex Burkhead has 80 yards and 3 touchdowns. But that being said, that's always a risk. And I think in as much as that's a risk every week, I think you still feel good about Damian Harris based on what we've seen the last few weeks. I think Cam, this is a get-right game. Similarly, I would imagine Cam is not even on a lot of rosters, but if you did pick him up, particularly with bye week issues, this should be a get-right game for him. If much like with Marvin Jones, if not Cam this week, then why Cam? So yeah, I would be shockingly disappointed and vexed if Cam didn't have a good fantasy week this week, given the matchup, right? And then I can't even feign interest in Jacoby Myers. I mean, listen, I get it. Like, someone has to catch passes. But let's not forget that given the state of this offense, I mean, Julian Edelman was fantasy relevant, 2 weeks before he got hurt?
Right.
And really one that he had a great week. So, and Jacoby Myers is certainly some lower percentage of player than Julian Edelman. So I have no love for that.
Yeah, we're really doing fact finding here on Myers for the stretch coming up after the Baltimore game next week, where they've got Houston, Arizona, Chargers. If we're going to tap into that passing game, but yeah, we may well see a Cam Newton 9 for 13 passing volume game, and then it's a question of he gets 3 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, 80 yards and 2 touchdowns, though, right? Like that would be that. It feels like that kind of week. Yeah.
Yeah, it's this is thankfully in every time slot this week there are some really excellent games, except for the Monday night game, but that's okay because, like you said, sometimes I like, again, Mondays just catch up on laundry in New Orleans, make some red beans. Gene, not an injury question. Actually, this was kind of a quiet injury week, amazingly, for you. Hopefully,
dare you?
I know, right? I did it. I bloomed it. I mean, just there wasn't a lot of things. The Zeke thing, even the biggest one, came up late in the week. There wasn't really a lot of things. So I just want to ask you, just because you are a connoisseur of defensive football, Mitch brought up that Miami. And folks, if you have any, for our wonderful people in the chat room, if you have any burning questions, maybe in the last 5 minutes, we might be able to throw up some jump balls and see which way they go for the folks here. Miami and Arizona, we heard Mitch bring up, and he's right, that people aren't going to be on DeAndre Hopkins, but I think that's because we saw maybe the birth of a new shutdown defense last week, or it could have just been Jared Goff. I mean, there's not a short list of defenses that shut down Jared Goff in the last few years, but you've got Xavier Howard, you've got Byron Jones. What's fun is you can really see with the money they've spent and the players they've added, the vision for this defense in Miami, and it really came together. And I'm really fascinated on how it's going to force Kyler Murray to either show he's evolved as a passer or perhaps show that he hasn't evolved as a passer. And then there's the whole Tua Tagovailoa action. That's a total unknown. Do you think this very compelling game is going to be more of a defensive battle or a showcase for the young quarterbacks? Or just talk about the Miami defense?
No. You threw me at the end there because I thought, well, I think Kyler Murray is fine. I'm not worried. I do think that Miami's defense is better. I think the sum is greater than the individual parts there. There's not anybody in particular that would obviously scare you. Xavier Howard is a very good player that hasn't really been able to show it consistently because of injuries over the past couple of years with knee and upper body issues and otherwise. But I'm not ready in any way to say that Tagovailoa is going to be able to manage in a difficult situation, right? I mean, last week was mostly the defense putting them in a good position to succeed. Not that he played poorly, but I don't know that I'm ready to consider Tagovailoa and his second start as likely to give us what Kyler Murray can. So, and I don't know that that's necessarily a defensive issue necessarily, but I think you could pretty easily project 3+ touchdowns and 24 points and better out of Arizona today. I don't know if I'm totally misreading something there, but
no.
So that end of that kind of threw me a little bit. I was ready to talk about the defense side of things. I thought, well, no, I don't know that this is a all or nothing proposition from both sides. Maybe it turns into a shootout because of how the Cardinals defense plays Tagovailoa, or maybe I'm totally wrong about Tua and he's ready to do everything that we've seen from Mahomes and Jackson and Murray and Herbert and other young quarterbacks over the last couple of years. But yeah, for sure, I feel like some of last week's Miami defensive great play was due to Jared Goff being the mess that he's become recently.
Jared, we don't get Jared Goff to kick around this week, at least. What were your thoughts on this fascinating matchup? And I think either way, we're either coming out carrying Kyler Murray out on our shoulders saying, this is, he's really made these strides, or we're carrying the Miami defense out and saying, this is a player now and how their division is going to turn out and one of those strong forces in the NFL.
Yeah. I guess it's how you craft the narrative, because Kyler Murray's the third best fantasy quarterback season to date, right? He's completing just shy of 67%.
Is he a better passer than last year based on what we've seen?
Definitely. I mean, he's completing 67% of his passes, 7.5 yards per attempt, decent touchdown rate. Like, I think definitely a better passer. Now, he's got it. The turnovers are definitely something he's going to have to control, right? You can't have 13 touchdowns and 7 interceptions in 7 games. Generally speaking, if you're going to be like an MVP caliber player, but I think he's better, and I was pretty tough on him last year. So I think, so I don't like positives. This is going to be a litmus test for has he arrived or has he really taken it to the next level. I'm with Gene. Like, I think the Miami defense is very good. I'm with you, Sig, that, and we might have talked about this last week as well. Like, you have to feel pretty good if you're a Dolphins fan, because I think a lot of us thought this was almost another punt year. And yet, if you look at how things are going and also how their salary cap situation is structured, they're in good shape, man. Like, they have a lot of young pieces, a lot of pieces they picked up on the cheap that are contributing. It seems like people are buying into Flores' system, at least so far. So I'd feel good if I were a Dolphins fan longer term. This week, I just don't see it as a statement game for either side. I think Miami with Tonga Vailoa in his second start, but probably the first start where he's going to have to do a lot if they're going to win the game. And then with their backfield situations, with Gaskin being out and Brady being, I don't know. It feels to me like the Cardinals could win easy here, but I don't know that would sour me on this idea that the Dolphins are well ahead of script.
Blue plays Arizona next week, by the way, so we'll get to see those 2 teams side by side. Okay, so real quick, rapid fire, lightning round, and I'll chime in, but Woodrow, I'll tee these up for you. David Meyer wants to know 2 out of Shepard, Mike Williams, and DJ Moore. Who said?
Moore and Shepard. Williams only if swap Williams for Shepard if for some reason Keenan Allen's like a last minute scratch.
Yeah, I actually am going to go Williams over Moore here, just because I think the addition of Christian McCaffrey, and remember, Moore didn't do anything last week until like a 40-yard catch at the end of the game, so we'll see. Sarthak wants some Spidey sense, Woodrow. Deontay Johnson or J.K. Dobbins in a half-point PPR?
Got to go Deontay. He's been one of the best receivers in the league when he's in the lineup.
I'm just going to confuse Sarthak and say
You're going to say
gotta go Dobbins.
Oh
well, here's the thing. Deontay Johnson, if he's in your lineup, he's going to get hurt. If he's on your bench, he's going to go off. And that's just like it's Schrodinger's cat kind of thing. That's just how it's going to be. The Warriors, the toss-up here, Woodrow, Teddy or Drew Lock?
Teddy.
I agree with that one. I'm not ready to trust Drew Lock yet. I'm not ready to trust Drew Lock in any way. Matt Kirkman wants to know DJ Moore or Hollywood Brown, the unhappy Hollywood Brown.
DJ Moore, especially because people are going to be on tilt after Des Bryant has 2 touchdowns today.
You're right. Exactly. Steve Sandoval jumping in here at the end. 2 out of 3, Will Fuller against Jacksonville, Antonio Brown, or Justin Jefferson against Detroit. Who sits?
Jefferson sits.
I think that's right. Again, you're trusting an offense that might throw 15 times.
Right.
So, folks, one last, we'll get a Darren Danker in right under Darren. Lindsay, Hollywood, or Judy need 2, Woodrow. Who sits?
I think Hollywood sits, but I don't love having 2 pieces of the Broncos in your lineup.
Yeah, that's the tough part. I probably would sit Lindsay just because that turf toe is flaring up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough. Well, folks, thank you always for joining us on Sunday mornings. We enjoy getting together and looking forward to the Sunday that we have every Sunday. We have together every Sunday with football. It's precious. We enjoy sharing them with you and hopefully helping you get over the hump or giving you someone to blame when it all goes very wrong. But we know we will enjoy our time. Really, I think for fantasy analysts, it's not on the resume, it's not on the purposes of fantasy analysts, but I think that if we could all only have somebody like that in our life for all of our decisions to say, well, they gave me bad advice, but we try to give you good advice, or at the very least keep you good company here, folks, always, because you're so very classy. You're the best.